So this morning, everyone has deep dived and learned about immersive realities and immersive technologies, which will lead us wonderfully to our first hands-on workshop. So I would love to introduce Olga and I guess myself for our next workshop. We're going to be discussing design thinking for all things immersive. And to make this engaging, we're going to be launching a poll to see what your baseline knowledge is of immersive. So feel free to answer that poll as we begin our workshop. Oh, we got lots of responses. People are still responding. So as you're having a think, you can respond and select multiple. I would love to introduce you to our first workshop of the day, Design Thinking and Immersive Realities. It's hosted by us, Musemio, and this is something we're incredibly passionate about as a company and as two female founders. So a little bit about us. Olga and I are the co-founders of Musemio, which started back in 2018. And Musemio is on a mission to make arts and culture more accessible for every child across the globe. What we do is provide immersive realities for museums internationally. So their audiences can engage, learn, and outreach to all of the corners of the world. So whether you're in Detroit or Durham, your audiences can engage with your collections. And both of us come from the arts background. I actually have my MA in art history, and Olga has her MA in cultural management. And we are passionate about supporting cultural institutions, large and small, develop and design their immersive realities. So the agenda for the workshop, if you haven't downloaded the workbook yet, I'm giving you a few seconds now to download that for the day because you will need it. We're going to outline the objectives for immersive experiences and then dive in what's the difference between immersive and traditional design thinking. And to do that, we're going to be peeling back the unique layers of immersive technology, which will require everyone to put their thinking hats on because we'll be brainstorming an example you can try in your museum. So feel free to drop into the chat or in the Q&A what you would like to learn today. Obviously, immersive is a buzzword that we've been hearing about, that our panelists have been dissecting one by one. Do you want to learn about how to engage new audiences using technology at their fingertips? Or maybe even exploring new value creation or revenue streams? So if you're just joining us, or if you've been with us all morning, you know the biggest question on everyone's mind is what is immersive? So from our poll, we had people click haptics, AR, VR, 3D theater. As you learned, figuring out how mocap can be used to make immersive. But the actual definition of an immersive experience is one that pulls a person in to a new or augmented reality, enhancing everyday life by making it more satisfying, engaging via technology. So some technology we've heard about is AR, which is augmented reality, VR, virtual reality, MR, mixed reality, and 4D cinema and 360-degree video. But what's truly important is that this kind of technology allows your audiences to feel teleported into a brand new reality or augments the real world around them. So for the sake of this workshop, we're going to be discussing AR, VR, and MR when we use the word immersive.
Hi everyone, now we're gonna switch the roles with Kaitlin, and from now on I will be leading you through this exciting journey. So you don't need to be scared. We will not actually I'm sorry. We don't want you to actually create a prototype today or potentially actually try to understand which technologies you will end up using. What we want to talk you through is this first ideate stage when you are on your journey to discover what surrounds you and what your collection has to offer to create the immersive experience later. This is done in order to bring your entire organization on board, prepare you for the conversation with a technical specialist, XR consultants, or an agency, depending on which path you would like to go, and also hopefully think about how you can use immersive experience that you create sustainably and long-term, rather than it being just one of gimmick. So we are using the combination of the double diamond methodology, and we will be focusing today on this bit, the discovery bit. And the layers that I'm going to introduce you to will allow you to think strategically about what you would want to bring into your immersive experience. So let's start the ideation process. The first layer of immersive, we call it the conceptual layer. This is your opportunity for your organization and yourself as an individual to identify which theme you would like to focus on, and also what kind of audience you would like to explore. In the first panel, our panelists said that you cannot really create the immersive experience that would be one for all fit. So I would like you now to think about which are this audience that you would like to engage more with, whether it will be the families, whether it will be the young adults demographic, potentially it's your current visitors that you would like to engage more with. And the theme can be as broad as your permanent collection or as narrow as a specific elements of the collection that might include just one or two paintings. So for now, I'll give you just 2 minutes to drop down some ideas before we will move to layer 2.
So Olga, as people are thinking, do you want to have some examples to maybe get the wheels turning?
Yes, of course, that's a great idea. So I think with the audience, I said, you know better than anyone else in the world who are your audience and what kind of audience you find it hard to engage with, and also what works from the strategic point. So I'm not going to really focus there on how to select your audience because you already know it. With the theme, well, this is a little bit of a challenging one. As I said, you can go as broad and to focus on your permanent collection, and you can choose it by a time period. or by a specific forms of the artwork or the objects that you are displaying, or it could be a specific element in the history of the museums that you would like to bring out. Here is a space for your imagination to think, well, what could be this most interesting thing for me to bring out to other people? There are different ways also of thinking about it, whether you would want to highlight something that is already having a lot of response from your audience, or something that might be hidden, and hidden so far as maybe it is in your storage. So actually people won't be able to see it on the display because the artwork or the object is too fragile. So think about what are the themes. And when we say the theme, it can be quite broad. We have here the theme of the ancient Egypt as an example. And ancient Egypt can be anything from the pyramids to the actual, to the different periods, to the different kingdoms. It could be focusing about the rural life. So the theme can be really broad at this point. Hopefully that gave you some ideas. And as I said, you can draw it on the piece of paper, or you can use our interactive workbook to drop down your ideas. You can also bring the same concept back to your organization and think about ideation using the layer structure. So now I'm gonna move to layer 2. So layer 2 here, we call it the empathy layer. This is a layer where you can actually start thinking about how you want your audience to feel after the experience. This is a unique feature of immersive technology. You can make people feel, and you can make people empathize with characters and histories that you're trying to bring inside your immersive experience. Again, what I don't want you to do is think about whether you will go for VR, AR, MR, immersive sound, mock-up captures. This is not relevant right now. Just think about how would you want your audience feel after they would be able to go through this fantastic experience. Will they feel curious, scared, puzzled? Potentially you want them to have a debate with their family members, or you want to have a further discussion within their school or within their university or within their group of friends who are coming to visit you. What emotions will you evoke? Generally, we are working with positive emotions when we are building any kind of immersive technologies. So, but if you're going with something that is a bit spooky, it might not be bad, because you can build up the entire landscape of the emotional roller coaster you want to take your audience through. And finally, when you think about these emotions, think about your audience again. Try to put yourself in their shoes. Your experience of ancient Egypt as a museum professional will be very different from an experience of a 10-year-old who will be suddenly teleported inside the pyramids. Or your grandma would have a very different experience and will try to understand the topics in a different way. She will also experience different emotions. So now I'll give you another 2-3 minutes just to think about what kind of emotional journey you want your audience to go through with the experience that you're building. Again, when we think about the empathy layer and the senses, it might be the emotions, but it also can be some kind of physical aspects you would want the audience to experience. Would you want the audience to travel through the scene? Would you want the audience to touch? I'm not saying it might be possible, but you can think about whether you would want them to experience something on the physical level. Actually, just while you're writing the ideas down, one of the most exciting experiences for me in Immersive, it was one of the very first Immersive experience I tried a couple of years ago, was a virtual reality horror game. I was really scared, but from that moment, I was very engaged in the story, and I was willing to stay with the story from the beginning to the end. So sometimes maybe even bringing unexpected emotions might be a good thing. And again, as I said, we are in the ideation process. This is a kind of like a broad part of our double diamond. And there is really no limit to what you can put there. You will be able to define and understand it more to actually create the final experience later. But for now, the world is your oyster. And please feel free to interact with our chat. And if you have some ideas, just drop it in the chat.
And also, if you're getting stumped with any questions, any thought processes, feel free to also drop a Q&A and we will answer it live.
We will have around 15 minutes of Q&A at the end of the workshop. So hopefully it will give us enough time to answer all the burning questions. Now, layer 3. Well, I think layer 3 is the most familiar one to the museum professionals and cultural institutions, because it's all about the visuals that you might already have in your collection. When we are thinking about the visual layer, we're thinking about what objects or what kind of concepts can help us to bring the story, the theme that we mentioned before in the first layer, to life for the audiences that we have defined. When we thought about the theme, we have probably created some kind of framework there, right? It might be the particular period of time, it might be the particular region, or it might be a particular artist. These are just like some ideas of the theme you might have identified. Well, now you can really dig inside the collection and select, I would say, around 8 to 10 objects that you think might be able to help you to really visualize it for the user. You can think about the specific objects you might want to highlight in an expected way. You can also think about the objects that people don't actually know how to use. Perhaps you can tell the entire story about how this object can become central to your storyboard and to your experience at the end. From the strategic perspective, it might be thinking about what kind of objects or concepts you want to showcase in the next couple of years that will be aligned with the strategy your institution is having, but it's kind of going into the next level of complication. So for now, just pick your favorite objects that you think will work for the theme and for the audience. What's interesting is that because we are working with Immersive, we can work with any kind of environments we want to create. And when you're thinking about the objects, perhaps you will end up having some inspiration to put it into a specific geographical location, or maybe an imaginary location. The example I would give you, when we were working with Petrie Museum of Egyptian Archaeology, we had a mummy portrait, and the mummy portrait was the most favorite attraction of kids. And the way we position it was next to the actual sarcophagus, so people would understand what kind of mummies they could potentially expect when the sarcophagus would open up. So here we had a realistic model of the mummy portrait hanging on the wall, and then we had a created visual representation of the sarcophagus that also has been simplified for a particular audience segment. When we were thinking about the environments, we were talking about putting our users into the ancient Egypt and perhaps allowing them to travel down the Nile River and get inside the pyramid where they could find this object.
Now, Olga, I have a question. I know we have a really diverse audience here and people might be shy to ask, but what if I am not a traditional museum? What if I am a heritage site or a gallery?
So when I'm saying the objects, I'm very sorry for anyone who is working within the gallery or within the temporary collection. So you might not have access permanently to a particular objects to work with. Concepts work quite well. And when I'm saying concepts, you can think about a particular artistic style that your gallery is proud to display. You can think about the particular processes that are surrounding the objects that you have on the displays that can form the part of the visual layer. For example, if you have some paintings available inside your gallery, you can mimic the style of the artist and you can make your users to go through the virtual environment you will create in the style of the artist. And now inside you will be able to drop the objects that would be relevant to the artist's life. They might not be there in your gallery, but they are there in the context of the story you're trying to tell.
And I have to say, we had our first cathedral in the chat as well. So there are really no limits to what you can portray.
Amazing. That's fantastic. I'd like to play with the cathedral, whether it's AR or VR or MR. I think the sounds are also very interesting for cathedrals and heritage sites. And also when we are thinking about heritage sites, usually we are talking about a particular historical period that the heritage site has been used, has been either created or used during before becoming the heritage site. And you can think a lot about how can you recreate the same atmosphere or how you can connect present and past by creating this visual layer of the experience. Maybe there is an additional overlay that shows what has been destroyed and cannot be actually seen by your eyes anymore. So now I'm gonna move to the next layer. And this is the most exciting layer for all of you. Because here in the interactive layer, I will ask you to think really big. What works really well with Immersive and the reason why it really draws into the experience is the fact that we can do things that we wouldn't be able to do in normal life. We can recreate the objects. We can see the layers of something that has been destroyed centuries ago. We can fly to the moon if we really want to. So now, already going through the process of understanding what is your theme, who are your audience, trying to understand what you want your audience to feel, and probably understanding a little bit more about what your audience might be feeling, giving the visual layer and the visual objects you have created. Think about what you would really want them to do there. Would you want them to go on a trail? Would you want it just to be an experience for them to observe? Would you want them to fly or jump or run? But is there a purpose for it as well? I will just drop a couple examples for you in terms of interactive layer and what is possible. Again, coming back to our project with the Petrie Museum of Egyptian Archaeology, our audience, our user, has found a papyrus before entering the pyramid. And when they're inside the pyramid, what they're actually curious about is what's written on this papyrus. But obviously, because they don't read ancient Egyptian, it becomes quite a complicated task. So here we get the interaction layer on top, allowing the user to decode what's written on the papyrus in the ancient Egyptian to the modern English. So actually they can get the answer that they really crave in the space of a couple of minutes of completing the challenge. Another popular challenges and popular interactive layers can be any kind of trails or treasure hunts you would want to implement inside your experience. Treasure hunts work for all. It's not kid specific. It can work for adults very, very well because we are all kids inside, just a little bit. We all want this opportunity to play. Other tasks can include puzzles. You can include reaction game. You can include drawing, because with different immersive technology, you can actually get people to draw or to create their own artworks within this experience. And obviously there is basically no limitation about what kind of super skills you can give them. So we all want to be superheroes just a little bit. So allow your audience to be the superheroes in any way or form you would want to imagine to be. Kaitlin, any chance we can launch a poll just to see what kind of audience groups our participants are looking to develop for?
Just give me 1 minute.
Thank you. Just would be interesting to see, and after obviously during the Q&A, you can bring up more questions. So what's interesting so far, we covered with you the first concept layer, and the concept layer allows you to understand more about the audiences you're trying to target and actually define what is this audience demographics that you're going to focus on, and also what is the strategy. Do you want them to come back to the museum, or maybe you just want them to engage more with your content? It will be different from any institution. Exploring what Immersive can give you as an institution is also a valid strategy and is a valid option, because you might not have an answer straight away. And also in our concept layer, we also kind of briefly identify what kind of theme we would like to focus, because as a museum professionals, you would probably know it. What's quite interesting for the layer 1, it's probably a good idea to check it with your colleagues, and you can do it in a quick call that can be as interactive as possible. I mean, ideally, we would want to do it in the meeting and you could draw and use a post-it notes, but in reality, you can just have a chat about it. Then with layer 2, it's the empathy layer. What do you want your audience to feel? Probably trying to understand their emotions and what kind of emotional roller coaster you will take them through will impact the decision on which technology you will end up developing for. Layer 3 is our visual layer, probably the easiest part of the immersive design concept to understand. This is purely choosing the objects in your collection or choosing the concepts and some visual elements you might want to put inside your immersive experience. And finally, layer 4, where we are right now, is the interactive layer. What would you want your audience to do? Think big. There are really no boundaries, especially right now. And hopefully this process will help you to shape up an idea that you can test with your audience. During our first panel, we had a lot of questions around how to make sure that whatever I'm going to create will work long term, will work for my audience, will work for my museum. And the answer is testing. Kaitlin, did you want to add something before I move to the testing bit?
Yeah, so we have that poll ready. So this will also help you refine your testing audiences. So I'm going to launch the poll now on who are you targeting with your immersive experience. And Olga, feel free to discuss more about testing as the results come in.
Yeah, of course. I'll just give a couple of seconds for the poll, because I think it also would be interesting to talk a little bit more what are the best testing mechanisms for different audience groups as well, and what you're trying to get from a particular audience group. So what's interesting with the concept that we are presenting to you right now is the fact that you don't need a technical company or an XR consultant at this point. This is purely for you and your organization to understand what would actually work strategically, what would work long term. And this will help you to avoid making your experience into another gimmick that will come out of fashion within the period of a month after being launched. So we have interesting poll results.
I was going to say the results are coming in. So we have a lot of children, young adults, and schools as well who people are interested in targeting. So I'm going to close that poll up in 2 seconds. So feel free to drop your choice in before we end that poll.
Woohoo. Interesting. So most of the institutions who are with us on this call are trying to target children and youth, and we have over 58% of everyone who voted. After that, we have schools and young adults. Actually, young adults go, we have 51% of people voting for young adults rather than schools. After that, we have the audience of adults. Adult population is the one that are hopefully paying for most of the memberships as well. And then we have older populations, followed by then international and only online. Interesting enough, you can use immersive technologies to create the intergenerational dialogues. So you can potentially create an app or an experience that would work both for children and their grandparents, or young adults and adults, or for the international and domestic audiences. Again, as I said before, it will depend on your strategy, and we will talk more about digital strategy later today. So now, after you have completed all the beautiful 4 steps, I'm sure the paper is full of the ideas that you're looking forward to share with your team and with people you're working with. It's important to understand that you cannot just create an idea and then suddenly implement it. You need to test it with the audiences. You need to test it with the audience that you already have available. There are different ways to test. There are some easy ones, such as surveys. I'm sure your audience is very engaged with you and the institution. So if you just send it through the newsletter, you might end up getting enough responses to either validate your idea or hopefully give you enough information to iterate. By iteration, I mean there will be some elements will change. You might not actually fully understand what a 10-year-old might want to feel when they're entering the pyramid. Or you might not understand what 65-year-old might be scared of when they are looking through the AR filter. So all these bits and all these elements will help you to understand more about what kind of technology you will end up using at the end. When we're thinking about kids can give you plenty of ideas. They're the most fantastic and the most grateful audiences to test with. And again, you can run the focus groups, you can run any kind of creative workshops and introduce your ideas in a very non-traditional way. You can ask kids to think about what they would want to do with the particular objects you're planning to implement inside your immersive experience. You can ask them to imagine you can ask them to imagine what they would be touching or smelling when they're set in a particular virtual environment. Or if you were planning to use a painting, you can actually ask it, what would you like to learn about painting? Trust me, you will be surprised. For us, probably the highlight of my entire museum experience was when we were doing some testing with kids in the museum, and I asked a 9-year-old what does she think is the biggest value that the museum has to offer? And she said, authenticity. And I looked at her and I was like, you are 9. This is not the answer I expected. But this is just something to think about, that you might end up getting a lot of interesting answers from your audience that will help you to change the experience for better. Once you have some kind of idea around what are you trying to create, after you've completed some parts of testing, you can also build some storyboards or some visual references that you can either test further with the audience, or you can bring to your team and start refining the idea. Unfortunately, that's not the end, because there will be a couple of more iterations before you will end up with a beautiful prototype or a beautiful solution that you can actually test live with your audience and introduce to your organization. We would like to think about it as a process and as a cycle, right? After you completed the first 4 steps, you will get into the feedback loop, and that's when you as an organization will really try to define what works with your strategy and with your goals. Because again, even though we want it to be the most engaging experience for your audience, it needs to be strategically right and correct and interesting for you as an organization to work on, and not to drop it after a couple of months of implementation. After we are thinking about the prototyping, and again, we can talk about the concierge prototyping, some things that would serve the same function, but potentially would not be built yet. Or we can talk about the minimum viable product. And the minimum viable product is the easiest version of what you imagine in your head that can already be played and would serve the same kind of function. And I think only after going through the 4 layers, feedback loops, and some kind of prototyping, you should be going to the specialist support. So again, something to clarify, by prototyping here, I don't necessarily mean that you need to have an in-house development team that will be able to bring your experience to life. Just a couple of drawings, just a couple of bits and pieces of understanding how you want the experience to work, test it with your audience, is enough of a prototype to have this first conversation with a technical specialist support. And what Will said in the first panel, do ask for a number of quotes, and do ask people about the process they would like to work with you as an institution. Because even though you want to be a guinea pig, you want to be a guinea pig for whom this experience will work long term, if that makes sense. So just be very mindful about that and see what kind of team, what kind of technical specialist you would want to work with. Ask for advice, look for Immersive UK, look for the Story Futures. They have beautiful documentation about the processes. And after we've spoken to the technical support, we will go into the iteration stage, and you might end up having 3 or 4 cycles of the same process until you would arrive at this final solution that will be ready to be rolled out to your audience. Recap. We kind of traveled with you through the journey of ideation today. And hopefully by now, you understand what kind of audience you want to target, but maybe you want to check it with your team. You imagined what is possible to bring to life, and you thought big and used your imagination about, how would this object work? What kind of story it might tell? You might want to engage others in the dialogue, and this is very important, to have a number of people bought into the potential and your vision you're trying to implement. Finally, as I said, test, test, test. Your audience will be the most responsive and exciting people to work with. So don't be afraid to ask for help. And finally, enjoy the process, because it's really fun. And I would like you to think about creating immersive experience not as something scary. Something that I just wanted to also briefly mention, there were a lot of questions about funding. Where do I find funding as an organization? There are some funding opportunities, there are some clusters, there are some pots of cash that SMEs might be able to give you, or you might apply jointly for a grant. But by going through the process of actually creating the vision that would work for your museum, you will probably be more likely to be successful in your applications, and also you will definitely be more successful in finding the right partner to work with, whether it's university, technical specialist, or a technology guru that you might hire part-time for your organization. This is all from me, and thank you so much for being such a fantastic audience.
Now I think we're going to open it up for questions. We already have questions budding in the chat, Olga. If you don't mind, we can do these Q&A style. So the first question we have is from Belgium. Thank you for joining us. he said this is such an inspirational workshop. He was wondering about our academic and professional background and what drove you to start Musemio. So would you like to start first?
Sure, I can answer it live. Thank you, Eric. That's a great question. So I did my master's degree in arts and cultural management already a couple of years ago, and I was focusing around trying to understand how immersive technologies can be used inside the museum to actually create a sustainable loop of audiences. Because if you think about it, in early 2016, we had a lot of VR experience. It was mostly VR. But we didn't necessarily have a lot of quality audiences coming in, and we had a lot of issues with some kind of operations. People would queue for 2 hours and after they would never come back if you see the audience spikes. So that's what inspired me to start Musemio, because I was thinking about how can we use these technologies, not just to introduce some kind of short-term solutions, but actually make museum feel good about them, and not to use tech for tech's sake, because this is something I'm really against. You should not use the tech for tech's sake. And if immersive is not the right way for you as an organization, there are plenty of other ways to explore as well.
And from my side, as you can probably hear, I am not British. I'm originally from rural America, and I fell in love with arts at such a young age, but realized there's a lot of geographic, social, economic barriers to arts, the institutions, and some of the language surrounding it. So I'm incredibly passionate about making arts accessible for kids. And if we can use the technology at their fingertips, how incredible and inspired could the next generation be? So that's just a little bit about why I got started.
Yeah, just something to also say that we are focusing specifically on the kids' audiences, just because that's our area of expertise. We spent around 7 months doing the research with Educate, supported by the Institute of Education UCL, to understand how kids are experiencing cultural content within the virtual environments.
So we have another great question, which I kind of want to allude to first, and then Olga, you can pick up on. Do you think the results from the poll suggest we might think immersive experiences don't appeal to older audiences? I think this is really interesting just from my standpoint, because from some of the research we've partaken in, most of the core museum memberships and returning audiences are kind of the middle-aged audience. So those are the ones who keep coming back. Where in our research, we saw the drop-off is those younger audiences, especially if they're not exposed at school or within their own kind of family unit. But Olga, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, so actually I think there is a little bit of misconception that immersive experiences do not appeal to older audiences. It's all about the onboarding process. So when you think about it, a 10-year-old knows how to use a phone, and they will kind of be very intuitive about how to launch an AR filter or how to put the headset on. When you're thinking about someone who is 70 plus, they're coming from a different generation and they have a different preference in the user experience and how they would want to engage with the audience. So I think like full-on VR might be a little bit too much for a 70-year-old to start with, but not necessarily. Like there are ways to create the onboarding before the person would jump into VR experience. You don't want people just to feel scared and uncomfortable. That would be my biggest concern. So it's onboarding that might or might not be the part of your immersive solution is the key to be able to target any audience with immersive.
I think
again,
as well. Oh,
yeah.
Amy also mentioned the expectation setting. I think with the older audiences as well as younger audiences, there are these expectations, and they vary by age, like Olga is mentioning, and the technical literacy and competencies vary by demographic as well.
Yeah. No, definitely, and also I think something just I want to mention about the intergenerational immersive experience. It is really fun to see a 70-year-old interacting with a 10-year-old, and this is being facilitated not just through the technology, but actually through this opportunity to create the engaging stories that you as museum professionals know what to do. Think about Immersive as a way to bring your vision to life rather than vice versa.
100%. We have another really great question in the chat. Can you share your thoughts about how the pandemic may affect the future of immersive technologies and how might we tackle this as a sector? Big questions here.
Very big question. And I think as a sector, what pandemic brought to us is the opportunity to think outside of the immediate solutions or outside of our immediate audiences. Because let's just be very honest, before pandemic, most of the museum institutions would not think about their digital audiences as the audience that have the same right for quality content as the audience that would actually visit them in person. So I think Immersive is a fantastic way to potentially address this divide and try to unite your audiences into kind of like one cluster of people who are sincerely interested in the stories you're telling. We also have seen a lot of uptake with AR specifically, and also the creation of some remote virtual reality experiences. To clarify, when I say virtual reality experience, I don't mean a 360 tour, because that's something that I don't find as effective personally. And from the research that we've done, we know that people are generally not as impressed with a simple representation of the museum, because you lose the aura, you lose this opportunity to actually socialize. So what pandemic taught us, create quality immersive experiences that are different from just the outline of your collection, what the VR tour has to offer. I hope that makes sense. If not, do feel free to reach out to us.
I think that this is probably our last and follow-up question. Can you adapt the immersive stories for use by schools or children online in times such as COVID? We may get, more pandemics, more closures in the future.
Do you want to target this question? Do you want to talk about the multimodal, Kaitlin?
Yeah, so I think one of my loves about Musemio is working with the children and working with museum educators across the UK. I come from 2 generations of teachers, so naturally it's in my blood. And the way you can adapt these stories from a curricular engagement is really the content and the level you're presenting this information. So obviously your school might have more curricular lined themes or challenges, but that does not mean children at home don't love to explore these same topics. Additionally, at least in our company, we are multimodal, which means that you can explore on mobile VR, tablet, phone. So it really is about providing access across the board. So I hope that answers that question.
And something that we just wanted to highlight, that after the summit in the next couple of weeks, we will be circulating something called the playbook that will allow you to hopefully have a little bit more of the conversational prompts with your organization, thinking about how to build this immersive experience and also understand where you are on the journey. You might be a complete novice, you might be someone who already played with it but don't know really how to step it up, or you might be a digital transformator and you might be already operating all kinds of VR, AR, and XR experiences. So please look out for that. And as always, please do reach out to us. Kaitlin, can you just drop our email in the chat? If you have any further question about Immersive, we are happy to answer any questions you might have. And thank you so much.